Chapter 11. She didn't speak for a long time. There really wasn't anything to say. She had taken an inappropriate step with her eyes wide open. If there were consequences, she would pay them. Now, she needed to gather whatever dignity she could scrape together and get out. I have to go. With her face averted, she sat up and wondered how she was going to find her clothes. I don't think so. Rourke's voice was lazy, confident, and infuriating. Even as she started to get off the bed, he snagged her arm, overbalanced her, and had her on her back again. Look, fun's fun. It certainly is. I don't know as I'd qualify what just happened here as fun. I say it was too intense for that. I haven't finished with you, Lieutenant. When her eyes narrowed, he grinned. Good, that's what I want to tell her. He lost his breath and with it the words when her elbow shot into his stomach. In the blink of an eye, she'd reversed their positions. That well-aimed elbow was now pressing dangerously on his windpipe. Listen, pal, I come and go as I please, so check your ego. Like a white flag, he lifted his palms out for peace. Her elbow lifted a half-inch before he shifted and sprang. She was tough, strong, and smart. That was only one more reason why, after a sweaty struggle, she was infuriated to find herself under him again. Assaulting an officer will earn you 1 to 5, Rourke. That's in a cage, not cushy home detention. You're not wearing your badge. Or anything else, for that matter. He gave her a friendly nip on the chin. Be sure to put that in your report. So much for dignity, she decided. I don't want to fight with you. It pleased her that her voice was calm, even reasonable. I just have to go. He shifted, watched as her eyes widened, then fluttered half-closed when he slipped inside her again. No, don't shut your eyes. His voice was whisper rough. So she watched him, incapable of resisting the fresh onslaught of pleasure. He kept the rhythm slow now, with long, deep strokes that stirred the soul. Her breath quickened, thickened. All she could see was his face, all she could feel was that lovely, fluid slide of his body in hers. The tireless friction of it that had an orgasm shivering through her like gold. His fingers linked with hers, and his lips curved on hers. She felt his body tighten an instant before he buried his face in her hair. They lay quiet, bodies meshed but still. He turned his head, pressed a kiss to her temple. Stay, he murmured. Please. Yes. She closed her eyes now. All right. Yes. They didn't sleep. It wasn't fatigue so much as bafflement that assaulted Eve when she stepped into Rourke's shower in the early hours of the morning. She didn't spend nights with men. Always she'd been careful to keep sex simple, straightforward and, yes, impersonal. Yet here she was, the morning after, letting herself be pummeled by the hot pulse of his shower sprays. For hours, she'd let herself be pummeled by him. He'd assaulted then invaded parts of her she'd thought impregnable. She was trying to regret it. It seemed important that she realize and recognize her mistake, and move on. But it was difficult to regret anything that made her body feel so alive and kept the dreams at bay. You look good wet, Lieutenant. Eve turned her head as Rourke stepped through the crisscrossing sprays. I'm going to need to borrow a shirt. We'll find you one. He pressed a knob on the tiled walls, cupped his hand under a fount to catch a puddle of clear, creamy liquid. What are you doing? Washing your hair, he murmured and proceeded to stroke and massage the shampoo into her short, sopping cap of hair. I'm going to enjoy smelling my soap on you. His lips curved. You're a fascinating woman, Eve. Here we are, wet, naked, both of us half dead from a very memorable night, and still you watch me with very cool, very suspicious eyes. You're a suspicious character, Rourke. I think that's a compliment. He bent his head to bite her lip, as the steam rose and the spray began to pulse like a heartbeat. Tell me what you meant, the first time I made love to you, when you said, I can't. He angled her head back, and Eve closed her eyes in defense as water chased the shampoo away. I don't remember everything I said. You remember. From another fount, he drew pale green soap that smelled of wild forests. Watching her, he slicked it over her shoulders, down her back, then around and up to her breasts. Hadn't you had an orgasm before? Of course I have. True, she'd always equated them with the subtle pop of a cork from a bottle of stress, not the violent explosion that destroyed a lifetime of restraint. You're flattering yourself, Rourke. Am I? Didn't she know that those cool eyes, that wall of resistance she was scrambling to rebuild was an irresistible challenge? Obviously not. he mused. He tugged lightly at her soap-slicked nipples, smiling when she sucked in a breath. "I'm about to flatter myself again. I haven't got time for this," she said quickly, and found her back pressed against the tile wall. "It was a mistake in the first place. I have to go. It won't take long." He felt a hard slap of lust when he cupped her hips, lifted her. "It wasn't a mistake then, or now. And I have to have you." His breath was coming faster. It stunned him how much he could want her still, baffled him that she could be blind to how helpless he was under the clawing need for her. It infuriated him that she could, simply by existing, be his weakness. "Hold on to me," he demanded, his voice harsh, edgy. "Goddamn, hold on to me." She already was. He pierced her, pinned her to the wall with an erection that filled her to bursting. Her frantic, helpless mewing echoed off the walls. She wanted to hate him for that, for making her a victim of her own rampant passions. But she held on to him, and let herself spin dizzily out of control. He climaxed violently, slapped a hand on the wall, his arm rigid to maintain balance as her legs slid slowly off his hips. Suddenly he was angry, furious that she could strip away his finesse until he was no more than a beast-rotting. "I'll get you a shirt," he said briskly, then stepped out, flicking a towel from a rack, and leaving her alone in the billowing steam. By the time she was dressed, frowning over the feel of raw silk against her skin, there was a tray of coffee waiting in the sitting area of the bedroom. The morning news chattered quietly on the view screen, the curiosity corner at the lower left running fields of figures. The stock exchange. The monitor on a console was open to a newspaper. Not the Times or one of the New York tabs, Eve noted. It looked like Japanese. "Do you have time for breakfast?" Rourke sat, sipping his coffee. He wasn't able to give his full attention to the morning data. He'd enjoyed watching her dress, the way her hands had hesitated over his shirt before she'd shrugged into it, how her fingers had run quickly up the buttons, the quick wriggle of hip as she tugged on jeans. "No, thanks." She wasn't sure of her moves now. He'd fucked her blind in the shower, then had withdrawn to play well-mannered host. She strapped into her holster before crossing to accept the coffee he'd already poured her. "You know, Lieutenant, you wear your weapon the way other women wear pearls. It's not a fashion accessory." "You misunderstand. To some, jewelry is as vital as limbs." He tilted his head, studying her. "The shirt's a bit large, but it suits you." Eve thought anything she could wear on her back that cost close to a week's pay couldn't suit her. "I'll get it back to you. I have several others." He rose, unnerving her again by tracing a fingertip over her jaw. "I was rough before." "I'm sorry." The apology, so quiet and unexpected, embarrassed her. "Forget it." She shifted away, drained her cup, set it aside. "I won't forget it, neither will you." He took her hand, lifted it to his lips. Nothing could have pleased him more than the quick suspicion on her face. "You won't forget me, Eve. You'll think of me, perhaps not fondly, but you'll think of me." "I'm in the middle of a murder investigation." "You're part of it." "Sure, I'll think of you." "Darling," he began, and watched with amusement as his use of the endearment knitted her brow. "You'll be thinking of what I can do to you." "Unfortunately, I won't be able to do more than imagine it myself for a few days." She tugged her hand free and reached, casually she hoped, for her bag. "Going somewhere?" "The preliminary work on the resort requires my attention, and my presence on Freestar One for a number of meetings with the directorship. I'll be tied up, a few 100,000 miles away, for a day or two." An emotion moved through her she wasn't ready to admit was disappointment. "Yeah? I heard you wrap the deal on that major indulgence for the board rich." He only smiled. "When the resort's complete, I'll take you there. You may form another opinion. In the meantime, I have to ask you for your discretion. The meetings are confidential. There's still a loose end or two to tie up, and it wouldn't do for my competitors to know we're getting under way so quickly. Only a few key people will know I'm not here in New York." She finger-combed her hair. "Why did you tell me?" "Apparently, I've decided you're a key." As disconcerted by that as she, Rourke led the way to the door. "If you need to contact me, tell Somerset. He'll put you through." "The butler?" Rourke smiled as they descended the stairs. "He'll see to it," was all he said. "I should be gone about 5 days, a week at the most. I want to see you again." He stopped, took her face in his hands. "I need to see you again." Her pulse jumped, as if it had nothing to do with the rest of her. "Rourke, what's going on here, Lieutenant?" He leaned forward, touched his lips to hers. Indications are we're having a romance. Then he laughed, kissed her again, hard and quick. I believe I could have held a gun to your head and you wouldn't have looked as terrified. Well, you'll have several days to think it through, won't you? She had a feeling several of years wouldn't be enough. There, at the base of the stairs, was Somerset, stone-faced, stiff-necked, holding her jacket. She took it and glanced back at Rourke as she shrugged it on. Have a good trip. Thanks. Rourke laid a hand on her shoulder before she could walk out the door. Eve, be careful. Annoyed with himself, he dropped his hands. I'll be in touch. Sure. She hurried out, and when she glanced back, the door was closed. When she opened her car door, she noticed the electronic memo in the driver's seat. Scooping it up, she got behind the wheel. As she headed toward the gate, she flicked on the memo. Rourke's voice drawled out. I don't like the idea of you shivering unless I cause it. Stay warm. Frowning, she tucked the memo in her pocket before experimentally touching the temperature gauge. The blast of heat had her yelping in shock. She grinned all the way to Cops Central. Eve closed herself in her office. She had 2 hours before her official shift began, and she wanted to use every minute of it on the Blastar homicides. When her shift kicked in, her duties would spread to a number of cases in varying degrees of progress. This time was her own. As a matter of routine, she cued Rocket to transmit any and all current data and ordered it in hard copy to review later. The transmission was depressingly brief and added nothing solid. Back, she thought, to deductive games. On her desk sheet spread out photos of both victims. She knew them intimately now, these women. Perhaps now, after the night she'd spent with Rourke, she understood something of what had driven them. Sex was a powerful tool to use or have used against you. Both of these women had wanted to wield it, to control it. In the end, it had killed them. A bullet in the brain had been the official cause of death, but Eve saw sex as the trigger. It was the only connection between them, and the only link to their murderer. Thoughtfully, she picked up the .38. It was familiar in her hand now. She knew exactly how it felt when it fired. The way the punch of it sung up the arm. The sound it made when the mechanism and basic physics sent the bullet flying. Still holding the gun, she queued up the disc she'd requisitioned and watched Sharon Ablass's murder again. What did you feel, you bastard? She wondered. What did you feel when you squeezed the trigger and sent that slug of lead into her, when the blood spewed out, when her eyes rolled up dead? What did you feel? Eyes narrowed. She ran the disc. She was almost immune to the nastiness of it now. There was, she noted, the slightest waver in the video, as if he'd jostled the camera. Did your arm jerk? She wondered. Did it shock you, the way her body flew back, how far the blood splattered? Is that why she could hear the soft sob of breath, the slow exhale before the image changed? What did you feel? She asked again. Revulsion? Pleasure? Or in just cold satisfaction? She leaned closer to the monitor. Sharon was carefully arranged now, the scene set as the camera panned her objectively and, yes, Eve thought, coldly. Then why the jostle? Why the sob? And the note? She picked up the sealed envelope and read it again. How did you know you'd be satisfied to stop at 6? Have you already picked them out? Selected them? Dissatisfied, she ejected the disc, replaced it in the .38, loading the star disc, taking the second weapon. Eve ran through the process again. No jostle this time, she noted. No quick, indrawn breath. Everything's smooth, precise, exact. You knew this time, she thought, how it would feel, how she'd look, how the blood would smell. But you didn't know her. Or she didn't know you. You were just John Smith in her book, marked as a new client. How did you choose her? And how are you going to pick the next one? Just before 9, when Feeney knocked on her door, she was studying a map of Manhattan. He stepped behind her, leaned over her shoulder, and breathed candy mints. Thinking of relocating? I'm trying geography. Widen view 5%, she ordered the computer. The image adjusted. First murder, second murder, she said, nodding toward the tiny red pulses on Broadway and in the West Village. My place. There was a green pulse just off 9th Avenue. Your place? He knows where I live. He's been there twice. These are 3 places we can put him. I was hoping I'd be able to confine the area, but he spreads himself out. And the security. She indulged in one little sigh, As she eased back in her chair, 3 different systems. Stars was all but non-existent. Electronic doorman, inoperably, and it had been, according to other residents, for a couple of weeks. Tablas had top grade, key code for entry, hand plate, full building security, audio and video, had to be breached on site. Our time lag only hits 1 elevator, and the victim's hallway. Mine's not as fancy. I could breach the entry, any decent B&D man could, but I've got a System 5000 police lock on the door. You have to be a real pro to pop it without the master code. Drumming her fingers on the desk, she scowled at the map. He's a security expert, knows his weapons, old weapons. Feeney. He'd good enough to department procedure to tag me for the primary investigator within hours of the first hit. He doesn't leave fingerprints or bodily fluids. Not even a fucking pubic hair. What does that tell you? Feeney sucked air through his teeth, rocked back on his heels. Cop, military, maybe paramilitary or government security. Could be a security hobbyist, there are plenty of them. Possible professional criminal, but unlikely. Why unlikely? If the guy was making a living off crime, why murder? There's no profit in either of these hits. So, he's taking a vacation, Eve said, but it didn't play for her. Maybe. I've run known sex offenders, crossed with Rika. Nobody pops who fits the mo. You look at this report yet? He asked, indicating the Rika transmission number. Why? I already tagged it this morning. You might be surprised that there were about 100 gun assaults last year, countrywide. About that many accidental, too. He jerked his shoulder. Bootlegged, homemade, black market, collectors. But nobody fits our profile. Nope. He chewed contemplatively. Perverts either, though it's a real education to scan the data. Got a favorite? This guy in Detroit? Hit on 4 before they tagged him, like to pick up a lonely heart, go back to her place. He'd trank her, then he'd strip her down, spray her with glow-in-the-dark red paint, top to toe. Weird, lethal. Skin's gotta breathe, so she'd suffocate, and while she was smothering to death, he'd play with her. Wouldn't bang her, no sperm or penetration, he'd just run his eager little hands over her. Christ, that's sick. Yeah, well, anyway, he gets a little too eager, a little too impatient with one, starts rubbing her before she's dry. You know, some of the paint rubs off, and she starts to come around. So he panics, runs. Now our girl's naked, covered with paint, wobbly from the trank, but she's pissed, runs right outside on the street and starts screaming. The unit comes by, catches on quick cause she's glowing like a laser show, and starts a standard search. Our boy's only a couple of blocks away, so they catch him. Don't say it. Red-handed, Feeney said with a wicked grin. Kiss my ass, that's a good one. Caught him red-handed. When Dallas just rolled her eyes, Feeney decided the guys in his division would appreciate the story more. Anyway, we maybe got a pervert. I'll bump up the pervs and the pros. Maybe we'll get lucky. I like the idea of that better than a cop. So do I. Lips pursed, she swiveled to look at him. Feeney, you've got a small collection, know something about antique firearms. He held out his arms, wrists tied together. I confess. Book me. She nearly smiled. You know any other cops who collect? Sure, a few. It's an expensive hobby, so most of the ones I know collect reproductions. Speaking of expensive, he added, fingering her sleeve. Nice shirt. You get a raise? It's borrowed, she muttered, and was surprised that she had to control a flush. Run them for me, Feeney. The ones that have genuine antiques. Ah, Dallas. His smile faded away at the thought of focusing in on his own people. I hate that shit. So do I. Run them anyway. Keep it to the city for now. Right. He blew out a breath, wondered if she realized his name would be on the list. Hell of a way to start the day. Now I've got a present for you, kid. There was a memo on my desk when I got in. The chief's on his way into the commander's office. He wants both of us. Fuck that. Feeney just looked at his watch. I make it in 5 minutes. Maybe you want to put on a sweater or something, so Simpson doesn't get a good look at that shirt and decide we're overpaid. Fuck that, too. Chief Edward Simpson was an imposing figure. Well over 6 feet, fighting trim, He preferred dark suits and vivid ties. His waving brown hair was tipped with gray. It was well known throughout the department that those distinguished highlights were added by his personal cosmetician. His eyes were a steely blue, a color his polls indicated inspired voter confidencia that rarely showed humor, his mouth a thin comma of command. Looking at him, you thought of power and authority. It was disillusioning to know how carelessly he used both to dual laps in the heady pool of politics. He sat down, steepling his long, creamy hands that winked with a trio of gold rings. His voice, when he spoke, had an actor's resonance. Commander, Captain, Lieutenant, we have a delicate situation. And an actor's timing. He paused. Let those hard blue eyes scan each face in turn. You're all aware of how the media enjoys sensationalism, he continued. Our city has, in the 5 years of my jurisdiction, lowered its crime rate by 5%, a full percentage a year. However, with recent events, it isn't the progress that will be touted by the press. Already there are headlines of these 2 killings. Stories that question the investigation and demand answers. Whitney, detesting Simpson in every pore, answered mildly. The stories lack details, Chief. The Code 5 on the DeBlas case makes it impossible to cooperate with the press or feed it. By not feeding it, Simpson snapped back. We allow them to speculate. I'll be making a statement this afternoon. He held up a hand even as Whitney started to protest. It's necessary to give the public something to assess, and by assessing feel confident that the department has the matter under control, even if that isn't the case. His eyes zeroed in on Eve. As the primary, Lieutenant, you'll attend the press conference as well. My office is preparing a statement for you to give. With all respect, Chief Simpson, I can't divulge to the public any details of the case that could undermine the investigation. Simpson plucked a piece of lint from his sleeve. Lieutenant, I have 30 years of experience. I believe I know how to handle a press conference. Secondly, he continued, dismissing her by turning back to Commander Whitney, it's imperative that the link the press has made between the DeBlas and Starr homicides be broken. The department can't be responsible for embarrassing Senator DeBlas personally, or damaging his position, by joining these cases at the hip. The murderer did that for us, Eve said between her teeth. Simpson spared her a glance. Officially, there is no connection. When asked, deny. When asked, Eve corrected, lie. Save your personal ethics. This is reality. A scandal that starts here and reverberates to East Washington will come back on us like a monsoon. Sharon DeBlas has been dead over a week, and you have nothing. We have the weapon, she disagreed. We have possible motive as blackmail, and a list of suspects. His color came up as he rose out of the chair. I'm head of this department, Lieutenant, and the mess you make is left to me to clean. It's time you stop digging at dirt and close the case. Sir. Feeney stepped forward. Lieutenant Dallas and I can both be on traffic detail in a fucking heartbeat. Simpson finished. Fists clenched, Whitney lunged to his feet. Don't threaten my officers, Simpson. You play your games, smile for the cameras, and rub asses with East Washington, but don't you come in on my turf and threaten my people. They're on and they stay on. You want to change that, you try going through me. Simpson's color deepened further. In fascination, Eve watched a vein throb at his temple. Your people press the wrong buttons on this, it'll be your ass. I've got Senator DeBlas under control for the moment, but he's not happy having the primary running off to pressure his daughter-in-law, to invade the privacy of her grief and ask her embarrassing, irrelevant questions. Senator DeBlas and his family are victims, not suspects, and are to be accorded respect and dignity during this investigation. I accorded Elizabeth Barrister and Richard DeBlas respect and dignity. Very deliberately Eve shut down her temper. The interview was conducted with their consent and cooperation. I was not aware that I was required to receive permission from you or the senator to proceed as I see warranted on this case. And I will not have the press speculating that this department harasses grieving parents, or why the primary resisted required testing after a termination. Lieutenant Dallas's testing was postponed at my order, Whitney said with snarling fury. And with your approval. I'm well aware of that. Simpson angled his head. I'm talking about speculation in the press. We will, all of us, be under a microscope until this man is stopped. Lieutenant Dallas's record and her actions will be up for public dissection. My record'll stand it. And your actions, Simpson said with a faint smile. How will you answer the fact that you're jeopardizing the case and your position by indulging in a personal relationship with a suspect? And what do you think my official position will be if and when it comes out that you spent the night with that suspect? Control kept her in place, made her eyes flat, had her voice even. I'm sure you'd hang me to save yourself, Chief Simpson. Without hesitation, he agreed. Be at City Hall, noon, sharp. When the door clinked shut behind him, Commander Whitney sat again. Dickless son of a bitch. Then his eyes, still sharp as razors, cut into Eve. What the fuck are you doing? Eve was forced to accept that her privacy was no longer an issue. I spent the night with Rourke. It was a personal decision, on my personal time. In my professional opinion, as primary investigator, he has been eliminated as a suspect. It doesn't negate the fact that my behavior was inadvisable. Inadvisable, Whitney exploded. Try asinine. Try career suicide. Goddamn it, Dallas, can't you hold your glands in check? I don't expect this from you. She didn't expect it from herself. It doesn't affect the investigation, or my ability to continue it. If you think differently, you're wrong. If you pull me off, you'll have to take my badge, too. Whitney stared at her another moment, swore again. You make damn sure Rourke is eliminated from the short list, Dallas. Damn sure he's eliminated or booked within 36 hours. And you ask yourself a question. I've already asked it, she interrupted, with a giddy relief only she knew she experienced when he didn't call for her badge yet. How did Simpson know where I spent last night? I'm being monitored. Second question is why? Is it on Simpson's authority? Is it a blast? Or, did someone leak the information to Simpson in order to damage my credibility and therefore, the investigation? I expect you to find out. He jerked a thumb toward the door. Watch yourself at that press conference, Dallas. They'd taken no more than 3 strides down the corridor when Feeney erupted. What the hell are you thinking of? Jesus Christ, Dallas. I didn't plan it, okay? She jabbed for an elevator, jammed her hands in her pockets. Back off. He's on the short list. He's one of the last people we know of who saw Sharon Ablath alive. He's got more money than God, and can buy anything, including immunity. He doesn't fit type. She stormed into the elevator, barked out her floor. I know what I'm doing. You don't know shit. All the years I've known you, I've never seen you so much as stub your toe on a guy. Now you've fallen fucking over on one. It was just sex. Not all of us have a nice comfortable life with a nice comfortable wife. I wanted someone to touch me, and he wanted to be the one. It's none of your goddamn business who I sleep with. He caught her arm before she could storm out of the elevator. The hell with that. I care about you. She fought back the rage at being questioned, at being probed, at having her most private moments invaded. She turned back, lowering her voice so that those who walked the corridor wouldn't overhear. Am I a good cop, Feeney? You're the best I ever worked with. That's why she held up the hand. What makes a good cop? He sighed. Brains, guts, patience, nerve, instinct. My brains, my guts, my instincts tell me it's not Rourke. Every time I try to turn it around and point it at him, I hit a wall. It's not him. I've got the patience, Feeney, and the nerve to keep at it until we find out who. His eyes stayed on hers. And if you're wrong this time, Dallas? If I'm wrong, they won't have to ask for my badge. She had to take a steadying breath. Feeney, if I'm wrong about this, about him, I'm finished. All the way finished. Because if I'm not a good cop, I'm nothing. Jesus, Dallas, don't. She shook her head. Run the cop list for me, will you? I've got some calls to make.